Skip the box and make your own shake and bake style pork chops right at home in your Ninja Foodi pressure cooker and air crisper, or another air fryer would work just as well. You just need a few ingredients, a couple of pork chops, and about 10 minutes, and I'm gonna show you how to do it. Welcome to the Salted Pepper, where we cook for real life using real food and we keep it real simple. And today we're gonna make some delicious shake and bake pork chops. I'm using the Ninja Foodi pressure cooker and air crisper, but you could use your air fryer or the indoor grill or the oven. You would just make slight variations in your temperature and timing. But this is a super simple recipe and you only need a few ingredients and it is so good. So let's get started. First thing we want to do is preheat the Ninja Foodi, and I do recommend you preheating whatever appliance you're using for this recipe because you want the inside to be super hot when we put the pork chops in so they start to cook immediately from the outside and get a nice crispy outside without drying out the center, because the secret to a really good pork chop is that it doesn't dry out. So inside here, I have the regular ceramic pot and I have the basket. You want to use whatever you're going to be putting the pork chops on in the Ninja Foodi when you preheat it, so that surface is hot as well. All right, so let's go ahead and hit the broil. I always preheat on broil most of the time. I shouldn't say always. There's always an exception, right? But most of the time, I preheat on broil. It's the hottest setting on the Ninja Foodi, and I like to get the inside super duper hot for that first, initial sear when the pork chops goes onto the surface. All right, so now let's make our shake and bake. So, interestingly enough, I had never had shake and bake pork chops, or if I did as a kid, I don't remember them. I think my mom pretty much always made everything from scratch, so I don't know that she ever bought a box of shake and bake. But Jeff was talking about it, and he said, you should really make some shake and bake pork chops. And I was like, well, that would be hard because I don't know what they taste like. But guess what? We have grocery stores, so I went and I bought a box, and Jeff and I spent like the entire afternoon like concocting different types of spices and tasting them side by side, and we finally got it really, really close, and it is so good and so easy. So you want to get a bag. I have a Ziploc bag here. You could use a container too. You don't have to use a bag. And we're going to add in 1 cup of unseasoned plain breadcrumbs. Now, we did do experiments with panko and with breadcrumbs. Panko gives a different texture. It's a little bit chunkier and a little bit crispier, but it's different than shake and bake. So if you want to stick to shake and bake, you want to stick with plain breadcrumbs. Now, you could add in Italian seasoned breadcrumbs. It would just change the flavor, but that's perfectly fine. That's the beauty of one of these recipes, is you can change the spices and completely have a different flavored pork chop in no time at all. So make it how you want it, as always, but this is what I did. 2 tablespoons of regular paprika. Now, you could use a smoked paprika if you wanted, again, a different flavor profile, but this is just plain paprika, and it's not sweet or hot. It's just American paprika from the grocery store. Oh, I'm not going to get into that because that's kind of like the secret one. 1 teaspoon of fine grind sea salt. Now, this is very important, and I hear people talking about this a lot. If a recipe calls for kosher salt or a fine grind sea salt like this one, you cannot just simply replace it with table salt. Your dish will be incredibly too salty. So if you have table salt and that's the only salt you have in the house, that's fine, but decrease this to about 1/4 teaspoon, and then you can adjust the next time you make it if it wasn't quite salted enough. But you don't want to go overboard with the salt. It can really ruin a dish. But salt's important for enhancing flavors too, so it's a fine balance. But this is fine grind sea salt, 1 teaspoon, and 1/2 teaspoon of just normal black pepper. Not freshly ground or anything. And then 1 teaspoon of onion powder and 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. These are not salt, so there's 2 different kinds. You can get garlic salt or garlic powder, or granulated garlic. That would be fine. You could use that in exchange for the garlic powder, but you don't want to use salts or you're going to over salt your mix. If all you have is garlic salt or onion salt, then skip the salt in the recipe and cut this down to about 1/2 teaspoon each, so you don't over salt the breading. All right, there we go. Let's get all that in there. And then the secret, well, I don't know how secret it is, but for me, nothing we did mimicked the flavor quite enough until I was like, Jeff, what is this sweetness? Could it be as simple as adding sugar? And sure enough, sugar, 1 tablespoon of sugar. Now, I could have looked at the back of the box because it clearly says sugar on Shake and Bake. But you know what? I didn't even do that before I started playing around. So a little bit of sugar, optional ingredient, really delicious without it. But if you want to get close to Shake and Bake, you're going to add the sugar in. Okay. Then we just shake this up. Make sure that all the seasonings are really well dispersed throughout. So take about a minute or two to do this. If there's any clumps of any seasonings, make sure that you crush those up a little bit with your fingers. And that looks good. All right, let's talk about the pork chops. These pork chops are 1-inch center loin cut pork chops. This is my favorite, well, no, let me back up. My favorite type of pork chop is the bone in, but not for this kind of recipe. So for this recipe, my favorite is a 1-inch center cut pork chop that still has the fat on it, okay? Yes, you can trim it off. It's still gonna be good, but this fat adds a ton of flavor and is so, so good when you use it in with the Shake and Bake style coating. So I cut my own from a pork loin. So I buy a big pork loin and then I cut it up into some pork roast and 1-inch and 1.5-inch chops, depending on how we're going to make them. If I'm breading them, I usually do the 1-inch. If you wanted a thicker pork chop and you wanted to bread it, you can do that, but your time is going to be different. So you want to base your time based on the thickness of your pork chop. So these are going to take about 8 or 9 minutes to cook in the Ninja Foodi. And if yours were 1.5, they're going to take somewhere between probably 10, 11 minutes, maybe even 12 minutes. So use your judgment and use the thermometer for the best accuracy when cooking meat. One other thing about pork chops is there's a misconception, and I've been challenged on this a couple of times in some other recipes, and people think that you have to cook pork to 160 or 165 degrees. That is no longer true. That used to be the case years and years and years ago. So if that's what you learned, it has been changed. You now want to cook to an internal temperature of 145 for pork chops. Otherwise, they simply dry out and they're not that good. Pork chops are lean like chicken breasts, so we need to treat them carefully when we're baking them or air crisping them or broiling them, however you're preparing them. So I take mine out at 140 and then I let them rest. That's another important thing with meat. Even when it's breaded, you want to let it rest for at least 5 minutes or so. So I go to 140 and then I take them out and the internal temperature comes up during the resting period to 145. All right? Okay, so let's get started because we have 3 minutes left. So see, this literally takes less than 10 minutes because you know I'm talking a lot. Less than 10 minutes to get this part, 10 minutes of preheat, 8 minutes to cook, and you are done. It is so fast, so easy, and so delicious. One thing I want to mention is that these ingredients, minus the pork chops, are for 4 pork chops. So I have 2 large eggs here that I just whipped up, and then of course the ingredients that we used for our Shake and Bake mix is for 4 pork chops. So I'm gonna have a lot left over. I'm only making 2 today, but you can certainly make 4. Now the Ninja Foodi, because of the area that we have in the basket, in order to do 4 at the same time, you would need to create a second level, and you can do that with a rack. But let's go ahead and get these breaded up. So, one thing I wanna do real quick, let me get a little thing. I always salt and pepper lightly my pork chops before going into the breading. And this is so that we layer seasonings. It's important in cooking that you season well enough, not over season, but you season well enough and you season each layer so that each bite is super, super delicious and very flavorful. So what I'm gonna do is just take a little bit, and I mean a little bit of salt here, and just sprinkle it over the top. So I'm not even 1/8 of a teaspoon. And then I will do that on the other side. I also like to bring the meat to room temperature, and I've already done that here, so we're good to go. It's not necessary, but it's going to help with more even cooking. So if your pork chops were really cold, you might have to cook them a little bit longer. You might have to cook them for 10 minutes instead of 8. All right, there we go. Perfect. Now, you could rub it around or leave it alone. It's up to you. And now we're just gonna put these into the egg wash. Let me move this and get our bag here. Flip them over. You could use tongs if you want. I just find it just as easy to use my hands here. And perfect timing because our Ninja Foodi is finished preheating. So pop these in the bag. You could do one at a time. You could do 2 at a time. If you're doing 4 though, I would not do 4 at a time. Only 2 and then put in the other 2. And then what do we do with shake and bake? We shake it. Now I'm gonna be throwing all this away. That's why I'm not worried about touching, you know, the outside. You don't want to keep any of this for later because we've got the pork juices in there now. So you need to throw any excess away. But usually if you have 4, you're going to use most of it, so don't worry about it. And if you are only doing 2, cut your ingredients in half. That's perfectly fine too. If you're only doing 1, cut them in, you know, by 3/4. So take it down to just 1/4 of the recipe and you'll be fine. All right, they look good. So we've got our Ninja Foodi preheated, and we're gonna go ahead and spritz the basket to put a thin layer of the oil on. I'm just using canola oil. You could use whatever oil you like. Then we're gonna open this up. Look how gorgeous these are. I mean, they are just beautiful. And we're gonna lay them right in. Okay, oh my gosh. Now, lightly spritz. You don't need to heavily spritz, but you wanna lightly spritz. And I'm kind of moving around to make sure I get all the areas there. Now, this might be surprising for some people. We are not going to air crisp these. Now, I bet you could, okay? But they are shake and bake. And so I wanted this recipe to be a baked recipe. I wanted to show you how well it turns out. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit and select the bake roast function. We're gonna take the temperature down to 350 and the time to 8 minutes. And hit the start button. Now, at about minute 6, well, actually about minute 4, I'm probably gonna flip them. I've been going back and forth whether I'm gonna flip or not flip. I've done it both ways, so I'll just use my judgment. But flipping will give a more even browning on all sides, but you do run the risk of knocking off some of the breading. So it's totally up to you. The recipe works fine if you don't flip, and it works fine if you do flip. So I'll decide that in about 4 minutes when I see how they're cooking. All right, so it's been about 4 minutes. Let's go ahead and take a look. Oh my gosh, they look so good. To flip or not to flip? All right, let's do this. Let's flip 1. Now what I'm using here is, oh my gosh, they're already crunchy. Wow, really nice. Don't know if it's necessary. I'm just gonna lightly spritz. I think I'm gonna go ahead and flip the other. No, how about not? Okay, let's do that. Let's not flip the other one and see how they turn out. All right, 4 more minutes. And I'll take a temperature probably at about when it has 1 minute to go, just to judge. Do I need to add another minute or so? All right, let's go ahead and get a temperature now. Oh my gosh, they look so good. When you're taking a temperature of meat, you want to go into the center. If it has a bone in it, make sure you stay away from the bone. And I'm getting lower than usual at this point. So let's look at the other one here. All right, I'm getting about 110 degrees with a minute left to go. That is not what I have been getting on the test batches. Let me talk about why that might be. These are 1-inch pork chops. But the previous ones I cut from a different pork loin, and maybe I didn't cut them exactly 1 inch when I was doing the test. So I did measure these before we started, and they are 1 inch. So let's go ahead and take our time up to 3 minutes. So this would be a total of 10 minutes of cook time now, and let's see how we are. These are the things that you have to do when you're cooking. Nothing is exact. There are variables that come into play, and when you want to cook meat perfectly, you need a good thermometer. So this is a ThermaPen. It's an MK4. It is fantastic. It's like one of the highest rated instant read thermometers available. It's super fast and it's really accurate, and I absolutely love it. It's also on the pricey side, but I will link to it below in the description for you guys. I got this as a gift. I'm not sure I would have ever paid for it, to be honest, but it's worth every single cent, I'll tell you. All right, let's take another temp now and see. We're looking for 140 at least. And Jeff pointed out something too that's interesting, and we are at 139, almost 140. Okay, we're at 141, so we're good to go on that one. And this one must have been a little thicker, even though I measured. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Yep, we're still at 125 on that one. So this one is ready to come out. The other one needs about another minute. So we're gonna go ahead and take that out, and we'll put this in, and so we're gonna go another minute. Okay, that's good. So Jeff pointed out that I use 2 different foodies too. Made this recipe yesterday, but I used the newer model of the 6.5 quart Ninja Foodi. So it was done in about 8-9 minutes. It was done. And today it's taking a little bit longer. So those are the variables that we're gonna run into between different models of foodies, different models of air fryers, different, the oven versus, standalone air fryer. They're all gonna cook a little bit differently. So the best thing to do is use a thermometer, take a temperature, and then as you get a feel for the machine that you're using, you can usually tell. But again, you can't get more accurate than a thermometer, as long as your thermometer's accurate. Let's go ahead and put this on the cooling rack. The reason why I'm putting it on a cooling rack and not just on the plate is because I want some airflow to go underneath. If you just set these on a platter, you're gonna steam the underneath, and then you're not gonna have this crispy exterior, and that's what you want in a shake and bake pork chop. I'm stopping this to take a temperature again. In my experience, once it starts cooking, it goes up fast, and I do not want to overcook, and we are at 140 right now. So that's what I'm talking about. It can happen real fast. Now this one is not going to look as good on top because I've been poking a lot at it, and as you poke, go ahead and turn that off. As you poke, juices from the meat come out, so you don't want to take a temperature quite as often as I do, but so you've got a little bit of this glistening from the juices. And I'm gonna go ahead and flip this one over. This is the one we did not flip, so this was on the bottom. Guys, that looks good. Let's see, oops, let's see about this one. Whoa, I'm making a mess here. This is the one we flipped. I just did that. I don't think it matters. I just gouged that one, but anyway, I don't think it matters at all. But I can see by looking at these that this one is a little thicker than that one. I don't know. Maybe I didn't have my coffee this morning when I measured. Anyway, I'm gonna try this one. And wow. I don't think you need to flip. I wouldn't even worry about it. So, somewhere between 8 and 11 minutes is the magic number. If they're 1 inch, really, because I think this one's probably like 1 1/4. 1 inch, it really is about 8 or 9 minutes. So, all right, let's go ahead and this one's been sitting here for a few minutes. I think it's good for me to test or taste. Oh, it smells so good. I'm not a real huge fan of pork chops, mostly because they're always overcooked and a little dry. So I was really pleasantly surprised. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this one straight down the middle so we can see the glistening of the center. It is done perfectly. I can tell it's gonna be so moist. Oh my goodness, it looks amazing. All right, now let's get a little taste here. I don't need that big of a bite. There we go, I'm gonna get some of that breading, let's see. Wow. This is so good. It's unreal. And then this side is really nice and crispy. Oh my goodness. Where that fat was, it got really crispy. Mmm. I am such a fan of pork chops cooked this way. They are unbelievably good and so incredibly easy to make. And like I said in the beginning, if you want a different flavor profile, so you don't want something just simple, you want to jazz it up some, add in other spices. I mean, you could turn this into a curry shake and bake pork chop if you wanted to add some curry seasoning and things like that. Turn it into an Italian type of breaded pork chop by adding Italian seasonings and some garlic powder or salt. I wouldn't use fresh garlic in the breading because it's just gonna get all goopy. It's not gonna work very well and you're gonna end up burning it on the outside. But yeah, you can get really creative with this and you can have this part of your dinner on the table in less than 20 minutes. So this is a huge win in my book.